In 1917, German soldiers were dying, not from bullets, but from infected wounds. The British naval blockade had cut off surgical cotton supplies. Field hospitals ran out of bandages. Gangrene spread through the trenches. Doctors faced an impossible choice: which soldiers to treat and which to let die. Then the German High Command issued an emergency order. Commanders across the Western Front received identical instructions: collect all nettle plants within 50 kilometers of every military base. What happened next was documented by the Imperial War Ministry. According to field reports, wounds previously considered hopeless began healing. Hospital stays shortened. Soldiers wrapped in nettle bandings were reported to return to duty, while those with improvised dressings remained hospitalized. This was not experimental medicine. This was 10,000 years of textile science the world had forgotten. For millennia, nettle fiber clothed emperors, equipped armies, and served as medical material. Historical records show it was stronger than cotton, more durable than linen, and according to battlefield surgeons across centuries, it appeared to resist infection better than other available fabrics. Then, in 1793, one invention changed everything. The cotton gin made cotton cheap, and what became cheap became controllable. Within 150 years, the most versatile textile fiber in Europe was reclassified as a weed. They did not stop using it because it failed. They stopped using it because it threatened an industry built on plantations, patents, and dependency. This is the story of the fabric that equipped 2 world wars, survived corporate erasure, and refuses to disappear. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, if reclaiming forgotten knowledge is worth preserving, the best way to keep this archive alive is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who want to remember what industrial agriculture made us forget. The archive opens. The year is approximately 3,300 BC. The Ötzi Iceman walks through the Alps carrying tools, weapons, and materials that will survive 5,300 years beneath the ice. When archaeologists discovered his body in 1991, they catalogued everything. Among the fibers used in his gear were plant-based materials, including possible nettle components, though the exact composition remains debated by researchers. What is certain is this: by the Bronze Age, around 950 to 750 BC, peoples across Denmark were weaving nettle into fabric. Archaeological excavations at Voltofte uncovered nettle textiles preserved in burial mounds. These were not crude survival materials. They were fine weave fabrics comparable to the best linen of the period. The plant is Urtica dioica, stinging nettle. It grows wild across Europe, Asia, and North America. The stem contains bast fibers, the same structural fibers found in flax and hemp, but with one measurable difference. According to tensile strength tests conducted by textile researchers in Vienna, nettle fibers demonstrate approximately 25 to 30% greater breaking strength than cotton and comparable strength to industrial hemp. But strength was not what made nettle notable in medical texts. What made it appear repeatedly in historical records was what battlefield surgeons observed when it contacted wounds. By the medieval period, European battlefield surgeons had documented something they could not explain. According to medical manuscripts, wounds dressed with nettle fiber bandages appeared to develop fewer complications than those treated with wool or linen. These observations appeared across centuries of military medical records. Surgeons used nettle dressings, not because they understood the mechanism, but because traditional practice suggested better outcomes. By the 1860s, Scotland was producing nettle linen commercially. Victorian medical journals published reports, though not controlled studies, suggesting reduced skin complications in patients who wore nettle undergarments compared to cotton. But the most extensive documentation came during World War I. When World War I began, Germany produced much of Europe's surgical cotton. But within months, the British naval blockade cut off imports. By 1915, German field hospitals faced catastrophic shortages. The Reichskriegsministerium, the Imperial War Ministry, issued Directive 2716 in March 2016. The order was specific: collect 2 full sacks of nettle per village. The collection was not voluntary, it was a military requisition. Historical records indicate that millions of kilograms of nettle were harvested across Germany and Austria-Hungary between 1916 and 1918. The plants were processed in improvised textile mills. Soldiers' uniforms, previously made from cotton, were replaced with nettle fabric, and the medical corps documented their observations. Field reports from German military hospitals, now preserved in war archives, claimed that soldiers with nettle bandage wounds showed fewer signs of infection compared to those treated with salvaged cotton or improvised linen. One report filed in October 1917 stated that nettle dressings appeared to reduce complications in field hospitals near Verdun compared to hospitals using cotton substitutes. When the armistice was signed, captured German medical supplies reportedly included significant quantities of nettle bandage material. Post-war, Allied medical officers examined the German field reports. While not conducted as controlled trials, the consistent documentation across multiple field hospitals suggested something worth investigating. But the investigation never came, and it would take another 75 years before researchers began testing why centuries of battlefield surgeons had observed what they observed. In the 1990s and the 2000s, researchers began conducting antimicrobial testing on various natural fibers. Studies exposed cotton, linen, hemp, and nettle fabric to bacterial cultures. The findings were notable. According to multiple published studies, cotton showed minimal antimicrobial properties. Hemp showed mild resistance to bacterial growth. Nettle fiber demonstrated significant antimicrobial activity. Research published in Textile and Microbiology journals identified a potential mechanism. Nettle fibers contain concentrations of flavonoids and lignans, organic compounds that may disrupt bacterial cell membranes. Unlike cotton, which is nearly pure cellulose, nettle retains these bioactive compounds even after processing. A study examining fabric properties found that nettle fiber demonstrated resistance to fungal colonization that cotton did not possess. Research on wound healing in animal models showed that nettle fiber dressings produced results comparable to some conventional dressings, though researchers emphasized that more clinical trials were needed. The fabric that medieval surgeons used because tradition said it worked appeared to work for reasons modern science could now measure, and it could potentially be produced at a fraction of the cost of synthetic antimicrobial dressings. So why isn't it being researched more extensively? The answer begins in 1794 on a plantation in Georgia. Eli Whitney patents the cotton gin. Before the cotton gin, separating cotton fibers from seeds required 10 hours of labor per pound. The cotton gin reduced that time to minutes. One machine could process what previously required a full day of manual labor. Cotton production in the United States exploded. In 1790, the US produced approximately 3,000 bales of cotton annually. By 1860, production reached over 4 million bales. But cotton had specific requirements. It required vast plantations, extensive labor systems, and soil-destroying monoculture. Nettle, by contrast, grew wild across temperate zones. It required no plantation infrastructure. Anyone with land could harvest it. That was not a medical threat. That was an economic one. By the 1820s, British cotton mills were importing American cotton at industrial scale. The East India Company established cotton plantations in India. Cotton became the foundation of global trade networks. Nettle, which grew freely in every European hedgerow, could not be controlled through the same systems. It could not be monopolized. And most importantly, it could not be integrated into existing colonial trade structures. By the early 1900s, agricultural bulletins across Europe began advising farmers to eradicate nettle from pastures, classifying it as an agricultural pest rather than a fiber crop. By 1920, nettle was no longer considered a crop in official agricultural statistics. It was a weed. The German military's use during World War I was treated in post-war histories as a desperate wartime measure, a last resort when proper materials were unavailable, not as validation of a potentially valuable technology. Post-war textile manufacturers returned to cotton because the entire supply chain, plantations, mills, shipping, retail, was already built around it. Nettle required different processing equipment. Mills would need retooling. Supply chains would need restructuring. The entire industry would need to change. But something deeper had happened. The infrastructure had been built, and infrastructure determines what becomes normal. Cotton creates dependency at every level. You cannot grow it in cold climates. It requires specific soil, long growing seasons, and substantial water inputs. Global cotton production consumes significant freshwater resources. Studies estimate approximately 8,000 to 10,000 liters per kilogram of fiber, and requires pesticides, fertilizers, and industrial machinery. Nettle grows wild across temperate zones. It thrives in poor soil. Historical agricultural records indicate it required minimal irrigation after establishment. It produces via rhizomes, underground root systems that regenerate year after year without replanting. The modern cotton textile industry is worth approximately $150 to $200 billion globally. It employs hundreds of millions of people across multiple continents. The supply chain assumes farmers will purchase inputs, mills will process imported fiber, and consumers will replace clothing regularly. Nettle fabric, according to historical textile samples preserved from the 1940s, demonstrates significantly longer durability than cotton equivalents. Museum specimens from the World War II era Germany remain structurally intact, while cotton from the same period has deteriorated. If European textile production had shifted to nettle in the 1920s, the colonial cotton economy would have faced an existential challenge. Plantations in India, Egypt, and the American South would have lost their primary export market. The economic stakes were not about whether nettle worked. They were about what infrastructure had already been built. By the 1950s, nettle had been so thoroughly erased from agricultural consciousness that most people alive today know the plant only as a stinging weed to avoid, not as a textile fiber that clothed civilizations. The generation that wore nettle uniforms in 1917 died without passing the knowledge forward. The German wartime emergency became a forgotten footnote in textile history. But knowledge does not die, it waits. In 2010, the European Union published sustainability research examining natural fiber alternatives. Among the findings, cotton production requires substantially more water and pesticides per kilogram than most other plant fibers, including nettle. By 2015, small-scale textile producers in Germany, Austria, and the United Kingdom began reviving nettle cultivation. Companies started producing limited runs of nettle fabric for outdoor clothing and specialized applications. Research continued quietly. Universities examined nettle's properties. Studies suggested potential applications in medical textiles, though researchers emphasized the need for clinical trials before any medical claims could be substantiated. But here is what the sustainability reports consistently find. Nettle resists the economies of scale that made cotton a global commodity. Cotton harvesting is fully mechanized. Combine harvesters strip entire fields in hours. Nettle harvesting remains largely manual or requires specialized equipment. The plants must be cut at the correct stage, retted, and processed with techniques unfamiliar to modern textile mills. This is not a limitation from the perspective of industrial agriculture. This is why it never competed. Nettle remains a localized, small-scale textile that cannot be easily integrated into global commodity markets. Every attempt to industrialize nettle production at cotton equivalent scale has faced the same barrier. The processing infrastructure does not exist, and building it would require dismantling systems already optimized for cotton. The fabric that equipped Roman legions and saved German soldiers refuses to fit the template, and that is precisely why it was forgotten. The story is not unique to nettle. Hemp was restricted when synthetic fibers became profitable. Flax production declined when cotton became mechanizable. Wool faced competition from petroleum-based synthetics. The pattern is always the same. A material that offers decentralized production cannot compete with systems optimized for centralized control, regardless of the material's properties. Nettle fabric is not inferior to cotton. Research demonstrates it is stronger, more durable, and possesses properties cotton does not have. It was not replaced because it failed. It was replaced because it succeeded outside the infrastructure that had already been built. The textile industry could not integrate it without retooling. Seed corporations could not sell inputs for a plant that propagated itself. Agricultural systems could not control it the way they controlled plantation crops. And most importantly, individuals with land could grow it themselves. Self-sufficiency is invisible to markets built on recurring sales. But nettle is still here. It grows in ditches across Europe. It spreads through North American forests. In the United Kingdom alone, wild nettle populations cover millions of acres. The plant that clothed Bronze Age peoples, equipped Roman legions, and supplied German soldiers refuses to disappear. You can find it today. You can learn to process it. And you can wear clothing made from a fiber that is stronger and longer lasting than most textiles sold in stores. Small companies are reviving the craft. Historical textile guilds are teaching the processing methods. The knowledge that nearly vanished is being rebuilt one fiber at a time. This is not nostalgia. This is remembering that alternatives have always existed. In post-war German textile archives, a report filed by a supply officer in 1918 reads, "We treated nettle as an emergency substitute for proper cotton. Only after the war did we realize we had been using the superior material all along and calling it a replacement. The fabric that served humanity for 10,000 years never needed rediscovering. It needed remembering. And the question you must ask is simple. What else have we been convinced was primitive that was actually practical? What else did we forget because it couldn't be sold?" If this vault opens something for you, if the knowledge that economic systems try to erase matters, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what infrastructure made us forget. Next vault opens soon.